Emily had always been a dog person. But when her friend Margot asked her to pet sit for a week, Emily hesitated. Margot's cat Shadow wasn't like other cats. Sleek and black with piercing yellow eyes, Shadow always seemed to know more than he let on. "He's harmless," Margot assured her. "Just make sure he's fed and let him do his thing. He loves sitting by the window." Emily reluctantly agreed. The pay was good, and Margot's old Victorian house, nestled at the edge of the woods, had its charm. The first night was uneventful. Shadow sat in his usual spot by the living room window, staring into the dense forest beyond. Emily put on a movie and let the cat be. But as the night wore on, she started noticing strange things. Shadow wasn't just staring, he was following something with his eyes. His head would tilt, his ears twitching as if he heard a sound she couldn't. "Probably a bird," Emily muttered, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up her spine. By midnight she decided to head to bed. Shadow stayed by the window, unmoving, his glowing eyes fixed on the darkness outside. The second night things got worse. Emily was reading a book when she noticed Shadow pacing the living room. His tail twitched with agitation and low, guttural growls escaped his throat. "What's wrong, boy?" she asked, keeping her distance. Shadow suddenly stopped and stared at her, his yellow eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, Emily felt as though he was trying to tell her something urgent. Then he bolted upstairs. The sound of his claws scratching at the floor above made her heart race. Gathering her courage, she followed him, calling his name. When she reached the top of the stairs, the hallway was dark and the air felt heavier, colder. Shadow sat at the end of the hall, in front of a closed door she hadn't noticed before. "That's not Margot's room," she whispered, her voice trembling. Shadow hissed and pawed at the door. Okay, I get it. I won't open it." She backed away, retreating to her room and locking the door. By the third night, Emily was convinced something was wrong with the house. The sound of footsteps echoed in the halls, but every time she checked there was no one there. Shadow had returned to his vigil by the window, but now his growls were directed at the glass. Emily approached cautiously, looking outside. The forest was still, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her back. When she turned, Shadow was gone. Frantic, she searched the house, eventually finding him in the basement. He was perched on an old chest, his fur bristling and his eyes wide with fear. "What are you doing down here?" she asked, her voice shaking. Shadow let out a deep, unnatural growl and stared at the chest. "No way," Emily said. "I'm not opening that." The lights flickered and the growling grew louder. But it wasn't just Shadow anymore. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Against her better judgment, Emily grabbed a flashlight and opened the chest. Inside was an old, crumbling diary bound in leather. The pages were yellowed, filled with shaky handwriting. She flipped to the last entry. "The cat sees it. It watches through his eyes. If you're reading this, leave before it's too late." The basement door slammed shut. On the fourth night, Emily didn't sleep. She barricaded herself in the living room with Shadow, who refused to leave her side. His eyes darted between the window and the stairs, as if guarding her from something unseen. At exactly 3 a.m. the scratching started. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all around her. "Make it stop," she screamed, clutching Shadow. The cat let out a loud yowl and for a moment the noise ceased. Then a voice whispered from the shadows. "You shouldn't have opened it." Emily turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the room. It was tall, featureless, and impossibly dark, its presence sucking the warmth from the air. Shadow leapt from her arms, hissing and swiping at the figure. It recoiled, but not before reaching toward Emily. She felt icy fingers brush her arm before she grabbed the cat and bolted out of the house. The next morning, Emily returned with Margot. The house seemed normal in the daylight, but Emily refused to go inside. "You said nothing about any of this," she stammered, handing Shadow back to Margot. Margot frowned. "I didn't think you'd actually open the chest." "You knew?" Emily shouted. Margot shrugged. "Shadow warned you, didn't he?" Emily stared at her friend in disbelief. Without another word, she turned and left, vowing never to return. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Shadow was sitting in the window watching her. And for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something else behind him. Something dark and featureless, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on her retreating car.